I remember the smell of the house the most. It wasn't the smell of old wood or fresh paint, but the faint, sterile scent of technology, the hum of 1,000 invisible servants working in perfect unison. My home was a living organism, a testament to a life I had not just built but programmed. The lights would brighten as I walked into a room, the temperature would adjust to my body heat, and the coffee would start brewing the moment my alarm was disarmed. It was a perfect, frictionless existence, bought and paid for by a currency that, much like my house, felt more like a concept than a reality. It all came from Bitcoin, from an early, almost accidental investment that had snowballed into a fortune I once thought was unassailable. I had climbed out of the trenches of a 9-to-5 IT job, a world of server racks and help desk tickets, and ascended into the stratosphere of the new digital aristocracy. I wasn't just rich, I felt like I had cracked the code of life itself. The stock market seemed slow and archaic, a relic of a bygone era. My portfolio was alive, it breathed and pulsed 24/7, a constant stream of passive income that flowed into my accounts while I slept, while I vacationed, while I lived a life most people could only dream of. I had 2 cars in the garage, a German sedan for daily driving and an Italian supercar for weekends, the kind of machine that felt less like a vehicle and more like a barely contained explosion. Their new leather smell was the perfume of my success. From the panoramic window in our living room, the city sprawled out below us, a glittering carpet of lights that seemed to bow in our direction. My wife loved that view. She'd stand there in the evenings, a glass of wine in her hand, and I'd watch her, my heart swelling with a pride that was so potent it was almost arrogant. I had given her this. I had lifted us from a world of budgeting and careful planning into a realm where the only question was, what do you want? Not, can we afford it? She had blossomed in this new environment. The constant worry that had etched fine lines around her eyes had vanished, replaced by a radiant confidence. Our children were in the best private school, their futures secured by a digital ledger that I believed was as immutable as the laws of physics. But there was a subtle shift, a slow drift I only recognized in hindsight. We stopped being a team, partners battling through life together. I became a provider, a benevolent god of our small universe, and she became its graceful inhabitant. Our conversations shifted from shared dreams to logistical plans for the next luxury vacation or the next renovation project. The intimacy of shared struggle was replaced by the comfortable distance of shared success. My old friends struggled to connect with this new version of me. Their talk of mortgages and office politics felt like dispatches from a foreign land. They'd look at my life with a mixture of awe and something else, something I couldn't quite decipher at the time but now recognize as a form of pity. They saw the golden handcuffs I was forging for myself. In their place, a new circle of friends emerged, other crypto evangelists, startup founders, people who spoke my new language of blockchain and decentralization. Our conversations were a whirlwind of tokenomics and market caps, a constant echo chamber that reinforced my belief in my own genius. I had no risk management strategy because I didn't believe in risk. I was the house, and the house always wins. I remember one specific evening, a charity gala my wife had insisted we attend. I stood in a tuxedo that cost more than my first car, surrounded by old money, by people who had inherited their wealth through generations. They spoke of art and philanthropy, while I could only think about the percentage gains of my latest altcoin investment. I felt like an imposter, a barbarian who had crashed the gates of Rome. My wife, however, navigated that world with an effortless grace that I both admired and resented. She belonged. I was just the guy who paid for her ticket. That night, a seed of something ugly began to grow within me. A need to prove that my new wealth was more real, more potent than their inherited fortunes. I started making riskier plays, moving significant capital into obscure startups and volatile digital assets, chasing not just profit but a validation that the numbers on my screen were the only metric that mattered. The house, the cars, the life I had built, it was no longer enough. I needed more. I needed to feel the thrill of the climb again. My obsession grew. I was tethered to my phone, my mood dictated by the green and red candles on the trading charts. I'd wake up in the middle of the night just to check the prices in Asian markets. My son's soccer game became a backdrop for refreshing my portfolio. My daughter's bedtime story was interrupted by a price alert. My wife started to notice. "You're not here," she'd say, her voice soft but laced with a growing frustration. "You're in that phone." I'd dismiss her concerns with a wave of my hand, telling her I was building our future, securing our legacy. How could she not see the genius of it? This wasn't a job, it was a revolution, and I was on the front lines. The debt I was accumulating through leveraged trades was just a tool, a necessary component of aggressive growth. The final act began on a Tuesday. The market was humming with an electric energy. Rumors were swirling about a major institution entering the space. I saw an opportunity, a trade so perfect, so audacious, that it would catapult us into a completely different echelon of wealth. It was a massive, all-in bet, leveraged to the absolute limit. It was the kind of move that could make kings or break them. I ignored the automated warning emails from the exchange about my margin levels. I brushed off a text from my wife reminding me about a parent-teacher conference. All that mattered was this one trade. That evening, I stood by the panoramic window, the city lights twinkling below like a galaxy I had conquered. My phone glowed in my hand, the numbers on the screen a beautiful, soaring testament to my brilliance. I felt invincible. I went to bed that night not as a man, but as a god, the architect of my own perfect universe, completely unaware that I was standing on the precipice of its total and utter annihilation. The sound that woke me was a scream. Not a human scream, but the digital shriek of my phone vibrating itself off the nightstand. It was the sound of 1,000 notifications all arriving at once, a hornet's nest of alerts from my trading apps, my crypto news feeds, and my bank. The sun wasn't even up yet, but the screen illuminated my room with a hellish, blood-red glow. Every single line was a plunging arrow, a catastrophic descent. The number, the one that had been my source of pride, my digital monument, was in a freefall. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of disbelief and terror. This wasn't a dip. This wasn't a correction. This was an extinction-level event. For the next 24 hours, I was a prisoner in a digital nightmare. I tried to sell to salvage anything, but it was like trying to catch smoke with my bare hands. The exchanges were overloaded, freezing and crashing under the sheer volume of panic selling. My commands would hang in cyberspace, pending but never executing, while I watched years of accumulated wealth vaporize in real time. Then came the emails, one after another. Margin call warning. Urgent, your position is at risk of liquidation. And then the final brutal blow. Your position has been liquidated. The words were so clinical, so devoid of emotion, yet they represented the complete demolition of my world. They had sold my assets at the bottom of the market to cover the loans I had used for my leveraged trades. The debt remained, but the fortune was gone. Every last Satoshi. The house fell silent. The automated hum of the servers in the basement suddenly felt oppressive, the sound of a life support machine for a life that was already dead. My wife found me in my home office, staring at the blank monitor. I hadn't moved for hours. She didn't scream or cry. Her silence was far worse. It was a cold, heavy blanket of disappointment that suffocated the air in the room. I tried to explain, to wrap the catastrophe in the jargon that had once made me feel so smart. I used words like cascade, black swan, and unprecedented volatility. She just looked at me, her eyes hollow, and said the only words that mattered. Is it all gone? I nodded, and in that small movement I felt the last support beam of our marriage crack. The days that followed were a slow, methodical dismemberment of our life. The first to go were the cars. I remember the blank-faced man from the dealership who came to collect the supercar. He didn't make eye contact. He just did his job, and I watched as the symbol of my untouchable success was driven away on a flatbed truck, disappearing down the street I once thought I owned. Then came the art from the walls, the designer furniture, the watches from my safe. Each item sold was another piece of our shared history being auctioned off to strangers. Our home, once a sanctuary of automated comfort, became a sterile showroom, filled with the ghosts of laughter and conversations. The arguments started soon after. They weren't loud, passionate fights, but quiet, venomous exchanges whispered in the dead of night, so the children wouldn't hear. She accused me of being a gambler, an addict who had bet their entire future on a digital roulette wheel. I, in my shame and anger, accused her of only loving the lifestyle I provided, of being a fair-weather partner who couldn't handle the, for worse, part of our vows. We were both right, and we were both cruel. The day she told me she was leaving felt both shocking and inevitable. There was no dramatic confrontation. She sat me down at the empty dining room table, the echo in the room amplifying her quiet words. She said she couldn't live like this, not with the lies and the pretense. She said the children deserved stability, something I could no longer provide. She didn't look at me with hatred. She looked at me with a profound, soul-crushing pity, as if I were a broken appliance she no longer knew how to fix. I watched, numb, as she packed. I will never forget the sound of the small zippers on my daughter's suitcase, or the way my son carefully placed his favorite stuffed animal into a cardboard box. They were too young to understand the magnitude of what was happening. They only knew their world was being dismantled. The final moment was a tableau of suburban tragedy. Her car, a sensible SUV I had always teased her about, was packed to the roof. The kids were buckled in the back, their faces pale and confused. She looked at me one last time through the driver's side window. "Goodbye," she said, and the word was so small, so inadequate for the chasm it was opening between us. And then they were gone. The silence they left behind was a physical presence. It was in every empty room, in every unused toy, in every corner of the house that was built for a family of 4 but now held only 1. The automated voice of the house would occasionally speak into the void, announcing, "The temperature is set to your preference," and I would want to rip its electronic larynx from the walls. I spent weeks drifting through the cavernous space like a ghost. I stopped answering calls, stopped eating, stopped pretending. My only companion was the crypto chart on my phone, the flatlined graph a perfect monument to my failure. The final call came from the bank. The word foreclosure was spoken with the same detached professionalism as liquidation. The house was no longer mine. It belonged to the numbers just like everything else. That evening, I did the hardest thing I have ever had to do. I picked up the phone and called my parents. The shame was a physical taste in my mouth, metallic and bitter. I choked out the words, "Mom, Dad, can I come home?" There was no judgment in their voices, only a weary sadness. "Of course," they said, "of course." I packed what was left of my life into a single cardboard box. A few books, some old photos, the laptop that had been my window to both fortune and ruin. As I walked out the door for the last time, I placed the keys on the cold marble countertop of the kitchen island, a final, silent offering to the life I had so thoroughly destroyed. Pulling into my parents' driveway felt like traveling back in time. The house was exactly as I remembered it, a modest brick-and-siding affair with a perfectly manicured lawn, a universe away from the steel and glass fortress I had just abandoned. Walking into my childhood bedroom was the final, crushing act of regression. The walls were still adorned with faded posters of bands I no longer listened to and athletes who had long since retired. A dusty trophy for a high school science fair sat on the bookshelf, a mocking relic of a time when my ambitions were simpler and my failures were measured in letter grades, not millions of dollars. I was 35 years old, sleeping in a twin bed under a Star Wars comforter, and the weight of my humiliation was a physical thing, pressing down on my chest and making it hard to breathe. My parents treated me with a gentle, cautious love. My father, a man of few words, would simply make me a plate of food and leave it on the kitchen table, his silent way of saying, "You are still my son and you need to eat." My mother, on the other hand, would try to talk, her questions circling the disaster like a hesitant bird. "Are you getting enough rest? Is there anything we can do?" I had no answers for her, only a hollow silence. The world I had to re-enter was a brutal assault on my shattered ego. The simple act of creating a budget, of tracking every dollar spent on groceries and gas, felt like a punishment. This was a task I had once outsourced to a team of accountants. Now I was sitting at my parents' kitchen table with a calculator and a pile of bills, the reality of my new life stark and unforgiving. Finding a job was a journey through fresh hell. My resume was a chronicle of a life that no longer existed. Founder of a successful fintech startup sounded like a cruel joke. I couldn't bring myself to explain the truth, the spectacular high-speed crash. So I lied, or rather, I omitted. I spoke of a market downturn and a strategic pivot that didn't pan out. I eventually landed a job in the IT department of a mid-sized insurance company. My new reality was a cubicle, a headset, and a never-ending stream of people who had forgotten their passwords. The irony was not lost on me. I, who had once managed a portfolio of complex digital assets, was now spending 8 hours a day telling people to try turning it off and on again. Yet slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to shift. The crushing weight of my failure began to be replaced by the simple rhythm of a normal life. There was a strange comfort in the routine. The 6 a.m. alarm, the bus ride to work, the packed lunch my mom insisted on making for me every morning. I started to notice things I hadn't seen in years. The way the morning light hit the buildings downtown, the casual kindness of the stranger who held the bus door for me, the taste of a simple, home-cooked meal. I had been so focused on the big picture, on exponential growth and massive returns, that I had become blind to the small, essential pixels of everyday existence. One evening, I got a call from an old college friend, the same one who had once cautiously warned me about the volatility of my investments. I had ignored him for years, embarrassed by my old life and arrogant in my new one. He didn't say, "I told you so." He just said, "I heard you were back in town. Want to grab a beer?" We sat in a noisy, unremarkable bar, and for the first time in over a year, I talked. I told him everything, the hubris, the crash, the shame. He just listened, nodding occasionally, and when I was done, he clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Welcome back to Earth, man." That simple act of acceptance, of non-judgmental friendship, felt more valuable than any amount of Bitcoin. My ex-wife eventually agreed to let me see the children. The first visit was painfully awkward. We met at a public park, a neutral ground. My kids looked at me like a familiar stranger. They asked about the big house, the swimming pool, the dog we had to give away. I had to find the words to explain our new reality without poisoning them with my own bitterness. I told them we were on an adventure, a new, simpler kind of life. It was a flimsy explanation, but it was the best I could do. I stopped trying to be the father who could buy them anything and started trying to be the father who was just there. We threw a frisbee until my arm ached. We built elaborate sandcastles that were immediately washed away by the tide. We lay on the grass and looked for shapes in the clouds. In these small, unmonetized moments, I found a connection with them that had been absent during our most extravagant vacations. I realized my primary investment in their lives had been purely financial, a transfer of funds into a trust they couldn't yet access. I had been their benefactor, not their dad. The long days in the cubicle and the quiet evenings in my childhood bedroom gave me something I hadn't had in years: time to think. I replayed my rise and fall, not with shame, but with a forensic curiosity. I saw how the chase for a passive income had made me passive in my own life. I was a spectator, watching numbers on a screen, watching my children grow up from a distance, watching my marriage dissolve in slow motion. The number in my crypto wallet had become my entire identity. When it went to zero, I felt like I had ceased to exist, but I was still here. I was breathing, working, and for the first time in a long time, I was feeling. I was starting to forgive myself, not for losing the money, but for what I had allowed the money to do to me. I had lost sight of what real value was. It wasn't in a blockchain or a stock certificate. It was in a shared laugh, a quiet moment of understanding, a helping hand from an old friend. I was broke, but for the first time I was starting to feel truly wealthy. 2 years can feel like a lifetime. The man sleeping in his childhood bedroom felt like a different person, a ghost from a past I was still learning to understand. I now had my own apartment, a small one-bedroom place above a laundromat that always smelled faintly of detergent and warm cotton. The furniture was a collection of second-hand finds and flat-pack assemblies, a far cry from the custom Italian pieces that once filled my mansion. But every piece was mine, paid for with the steady, predictable income from a job I had come to find a quiet satisfaction in. I was no longer just resetting passwords. I had been promoted to a junior network administrator at the insurance company. The work was logical, methodical, and grounded in a tangible reality. When I fixed something, it stayed fixed. It didn't vanish in a maelstrom of market panic. I had a budget I stuck to religiously, a simple spreadsheet that governed my life. It wasn't a life of glamour, but it was a life of stability, a life I had built myself, brick by boring, reliable brick. My relationship with my ex-wife had settled into a kind of peaceful détente. The anger had faded, replaced by a shared history and the common goal of raising our children. We were co-parents, business partners in the enterprise of our kids' well-being. We met for coffee once a month to coordinate schedules and discuss school reports. During one of these meetings, she looked at me across the table and smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile. "You seem different," she said. "Calmer." I told her I was. The constant, gnawing anxiety of checking charts and managing high-risk investments had been replaced by a sense of peace I hadn't realized was possible. We would never get back together, too much had been broken, but we had found a way to be kind to each other, and for that I was profoundly grateful. I finally understood that she hadn't left me because the money was gone. She had left because I was gone, lost in a digital haze long before the crash. The ultimate test came in the form of an email. It was from one of the friends from my old life, a crypto evangelist who had somehow survived the crash. The email was breathless with excitement, filled with the old jargon about a new protocol, a groundbreaking startup, a guaranteed 10-bagger. He was offering me a spot in the private pre-sale. For a fleeting moment, my heart hammered in my chest. The old thrill, the gambler's itch, returned like a phantom limb. I could feel the pull, the siren song of easy money and a return to glory. I opened the pitch deck, saw the familiar hockey stick projection charts and the promises of a decentralized future. But this time I saw it for what it was. It wasn't an investment, it was a lottery ticket, a fantasy. I thought about my small apartment, my steady paycheck, my predictable budget. I thought about my weekends with my kids, our trips to the park, the uncomplicated joy of watching them learn to ride their bikes. I thought about the peace of mind that came with knowing exactly where I stood, with not having my entire sense of self-worth tied to a volatile number on a screen. My life was small now, but it was real. Its foundations were solid. I typed out a reply. "Thanks for the offer, but I'm out of the game. Wish you the best." As I hit send, I felt a sense of relief so profound it almost brought me to tears. I had finally, truly closed the door on that part of my life. My story ends not with a dramatic flourish, but with a simple, perfect afternoon. I was at the park with my kids. My daughter was on the swings, trying to go so high her feet could touch the clouds. My son was engrossed in a detailed study of an anthill. I was sitting on a bench, the warm sun on my face. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. The balance was modest, a humble four-figure number that represented months of careful saving. It was just enough. It was enough for rent, for groceries, for a pizza night with the kids, and a little left over to put away for a rainy day. I realized in that moment that my portfolio was no longer measured in Bitcoin or stocks. It was right here in front of me. My children's laughter was my passive income. My stable, boring job was my risk management. The love of my parents and the rediscovered friendship was the only insurance policy that mattered. Losing a fortune I thought defined me was the only thing that could have saved me. It forced me to strip my life down to its studs and rebuild it from a foundation of genuine value. The crash didn't just take my money, it gave me back my life, a life I was almost too rich to notice. Thanks for listening to this story. Now I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Let's see how global our community is. Comment your country down below. Share this story to your friends and leave a like and subscribe for more episodes like this.